Sometimes, Scorpio isn't really searching for something new at all. It's just an ordinary moment in the day when the pace slows down, right in the middle of a road that's been walked so many times before. The scenery hasn't changed. Life around keeps moving. But somewhere inside, something feels different, almost like a very quiet whisper saying, "You've come farther than you realized." Those moments often arrive late at night, when the streetlights are bright enough to see the path ahead, but not so bright that they drown out your thoughts. Scorpio tends to pause there, not out of confusion, but out of a need to listen, not really listening for clear answers, just listening to their own breathing, to the subtle sensation spreading gently through the chest. On that familiar journey, everything once felt clear, the goals, the choices, like even the things that used to make the heart race. But at some point, the old markers stopped feeling the same, not because they were wrong, but because the person inside has changed, like returning to an old room. The furniture is still there, yet the light falling into it is different now. Scorpio has always had the ability to go deep, deep into emotions, deep into thoughts, deep into experiences that don't have easy names. So standing still in the middle of a familiar road isn't hesitation. It feels more like a long breath in, a moment to notice where you are, what you're carrying, and what has quietly become too heavy to keep holding. People often say change is loud, but for Scorpio, some of the most important shifts happen in silence, like a small flame burning through the night, not dramatic, not explosive, just warm enough to light up the hidden corners. This pause isn't about turning back, and it's not about choosing a new direction right away. It's a necessary stillness. In that stillness, old questions may return, but softer this time. Why am I walking this path? Does this still fit me? There's no pressure to answer right away, just allowing yourself to recognize that every journey has stretches where slowing down is part of the way forward. Scorpio is used to moving ahead through sheer willpower, so stopping can feel unfamiliar. Yet that unfamiliarity carries something deeply human, like opening a window early in the morning. Cool air fills the room. Nothing extraordinary happens, but somehow everything feels easier to breathe. Standing there on that familiar road, Scorpio doesn't judge right or wrong. It doesn't rush to label emotions. There's simply an acknowledgement. I've changed. And that change doesn't need to be explained to anyone. It exists as a quiet, honest reality. Maybe it's from these seemingly small moments that a new phase of the journey begins, not through big leaps, but through a deeper presence with yourself. And if there's anything worth carrying forward, it's this feeling of seeing more clearly the ground you're standing on before taking the next step. And right in that moment, something quietly unusual happens. Not a big decision, not a sudden awakening like the stories people tell. Just the pace of everything around slows down, slightly, enough to notice details that were always there, but rarely seen. The sound of wind moving through the trees feels clearer, or the streetlight spilling onto the road doesn't feel as cold as it used to. Very small things. Yet somehow, they ease the heart. Scorpio is used to strong emotional waves, so when things begin to move gently, it can take time to notice. Only later does it become clear that reactions have changed. Situations that once weighed heavily on the heart no longer land the same way. Some mornings begin without the usual rush. Some evenings, the quiet room no longer feels empty. It feels like shelter. Just enough. Just safe enough. These changes don't announce themselves. They don't arrive with noise or clear milestones to mark their presence. An old thought no longer stirs the same unrest. A story that once lingered painfully is now seen through different eyes, like a small flame in the kitchen, not bright, not dramatic, but warm enough to stay. At times, Scorpio notices there's no longer a need to control everything, not because of giving up, but because some things don't need to be held so tightly. At first, that feeling is fragile. It comes, It goes, then returns, each time a little clearer, like early morning light slipping through the curtains. It doesn't interrupt sleep, but it quietly changes the color of the room. These quiet shifts often connect to very ordinary moments. Sitting silently in a familiar cafe, watching people pass by without needing to understand where they're rushing to. A short conversation, not deep, yet leaving an echo longer than expected. Moments like these don't feel important at first, but together they build a sense of inner steadiness. Scorpio may not be able to name what's changing, only that when facing small choices, the body feels less tense. There's no longer a need to prove anything, no urgency to keep up with anyone else. A personal rhythm begins to form, slow, gentle, yet clear enough to sense that life is being lived closer to the self. Perhaps it's precisely because these movements are quiet that they reach so deeply. They don't disrupt. They don't demand immediate change. They simply remain, softly adjusting how things are felt, how reactions arise, how one stays with oneself in moments that seem entirely ordinary. And then one day, looking back, Scorpio may realize something simple. The world hasn't changed all that much, but the way it's felt has slowed. The breath is deeper now. From that slower breath, another feeling begins to surface. Not clearly at first, on just a quiet noticing that the hands are no longer gripping so tightly. Things once held with great care, things once believed to be essential, now rest there without stirring the same unease, like setting a heavy bag down on the floor after a long day. The body hasn't fully realized it yet, but the shoulders already feel lighter. Scorpio has always known how to hold on, holding emotions, holding memories, holding on to things that happened a long time ago. Some things were kept not because they were still needed, but because they once mattered. And time, in its quiet way, teaches that not everything that was important has to be carried forever. Sometimes letting go isn't giving up. It's allowing yourself to walk more easily. That sense of release doesn't arrive all at once. It feels more like a rope being loosened, little by little. At first, there's hesitation, a lingering fear that if you stop holding on, everything might slip away. But when the grip finally softens, what remains isn't emptiness. It's space, just enough room to breathe. Some evenings, Scorpio sits alone in a familiar room, looking back at old thoughts, without the urge to react. A story that once felt heavy now stands still, like a memory placed gently behind glass. Not sad, not happy, just no longer in front. Warm light spreads across the wall. The darkness isn't frightening anymore. It feels gentler, almost kind. Letting go also means no longer forcing yourself to understand everything. No need to chase explanations for every feeling. No need to make sense of why a connection has changed. Sometimes, accepting that certain things pass naturally brings a calm that once felt out of reach. So Scorpio begins to notice this through very small reactions. There's no rush to respond, less irritation when things don't unfold as expected. Spaces appear between thoughts, and instead of filling them, they're allowed to remain, like the pause between two musical notes. Without it, the melody wouldn't feel complete. This lightness doesn't make a person shallow, quite the opposite. It sharpens the sense of what truly matters. When less is being carried, each step feels steadier. The road hasn't changed, but the way it's walked has. Not faster, just more grounded. And in that very human kind of relief, Scorpio slowly understands that letting go doesn't take depth away. It simply frees that depth from being weighed down. Like water, when a few barriers are removed, it doesn't rush forward. It doesn't force its way through. It quietly finds its natural direction again. And as that flow begins to settle, another kind of space opens up, quieter, deeper. Silence no longer feels like something that needs to be filled. It shows up like a friend sitting nearby, not asking questions, not urging anything forward, just being there. On evenings when light falls at an angle across the wall, Scorpio notices an unfamiliar ease, the ability to sit with feelings without needing to name them. No analysis, no conclusions to reach. Silence starts to take on a different tone, not avoidance, not loneliness, more like a quiet room after a long day, where the noise finally settles and whatever remains becomes clearer. In that space, thoughts move slowly, slow enough to see their shape before they dissolve. Some moments feel very ordinary. Sitting in a car at night, with the radio off, only the steady sound of tires against the road, or standing by a window late in the evening, watching a few lights still glowing in distant apartments, wondering, briefly, what life might look like inside those rooms. Those questions don't need answers. They arrive only to remind us that life continues in many different rhythms. Scorpio is used to speaking little and thinking deeply, and when silence lasts long enough, what truly matters begins to surface on its own. Not loud memories, not intense emotions, but subtler things. The way a simple sentence can touch something inside. The way a passing glance can linger longer than expected. Small things once overlooked now feel worth holding on to. Within that silence, there's also a quiet realization. Not everything needs an immediate response. That not every moment requires an answer. Not every empty space needs to be filled. Sometimes, letting things remain exactly where they are feels safer than trying to rearrange them. Extended stillness doesn't make the outside world disappear. It simply changes how it's received. Sounds soften, light feels less sharp. Even heavier emotions no longer press in the same way. They pass more slowly now, leaving behind something very human, the sense of being alive, present, and a little more whole. And when returning to the usual rhythm of daily life, Scorpio carries that silence quietly within. No display, no need for recognition. Just the knowledge that somewhere inside, there is a calm place to return to whenever the world outside becomes too loud. But perhaps it's within these quiet spaces that the journey continues to take shape. Not through raised voices, not through rushed decisions, but through a deeper kind of listening. Listening to oneself, and to everything unfolding very softly, all around. From that listening, something very subtle begins to happen. Not the discovery of a completely new self, but a softer way of looking at who you already are. Some mornings, standing in front of the mirror, your gaze meets a familiar face and suddenly notices that something has shifted. It's hard to say where, maybe in the eyes, maybe in the way you linger a moment longer before turning away. All that's clear is this: the urge to judge has quieted, making room for a gentler kind of acceptance. These changes rarely arrive with big thoughts. They show up in very small choices. So choosing silence instead of explanation, choosing rest instead of pushing a little further, choosing to slow down on a day that already feels long enough. None of these choices feel decisive on their own, but together, they begin to sketch a different image of the self. At times, Scorpio notices old reactions no longer rise the way they used to. Things that once caused the heart to close now pass through like a light breeze. Not because of becoming distant, but because personal boundaries are clearer now. Because it's understood that not every emotion needs to be held on to, and not every thought needs to be believed right away. This difference also shows up in how past pride and past regret are viewed. Old achievements are no longer something to cling to, but they aren't dismissed either. Earlier mistakes lose their weight, just becoming quiet markers along the road already traveled. Like small scratches on a wooden table, they don't reduce its worth. They tell a story that feels honest. In quieter moments, Scorpio may notice staying with oneself a little longer. No need to do anything. No need to become someone else. Just being there, with all the parts that were once hidden or misunderstood. That feeling isn't always comfortable at first, but the longer it's allowed to remain, the lighter it becomes. Some days, a simple thought appears. I don't have to be who I used to be. It carries no regret, no obvious joy. It rests there like a truth placed gently on the table, not needing debate. And from that truth, other things begin to rearrange themselves naturally. This new way of seeing oneself doesn't make Scorpio seem different to the outside world. Everything around may look the same, but inside, there's more space to breathe, to think, to feel. Like opening an extra window in a room. Light doesn't rush in. It just arrives enough to reveal corners that once stayed in shadow. And in that just enough light, Scorpio slowly learns to meet the self, not through control, but through presence. No fixing, no perfecting. Simply noticing where you are on this journey and allowing that to exist naturally. From that sense of permission, the connections around Scorpio begin to appear differently. Not because people suddenly change, but because the way they're felt has softened. Familiar meetings no longer carry the pressure to say something meaningful or profound. Sometimes, like just sitting together in a small cafe, the quiet clink of a spoon against a cup is enough to feel a thread is there. Thin, but steady. Some relationships were once held together by effort. The effort to understand, the effort to explain, the effort to keep things from drifting too far apart. Now, that effort eases, not from giving up, but from realizing that real closeness doesn't require force. It's like a small flame in the kitchen. It stays warm without constant fuel, as long as it's allowed to burn at its own pace. Scorpio begins to listen differently. No longer listening in order to respond, but listening for what lives in the pauses between words. A gaze that drops when a conversation touches something sensitive. A brief smile, not to hide anything, just to keep the air light. Or details once overlooked now become places where understanding can rest. Expectations shift as well. There's less need for others to stay in the exact way imagined. Less reliance on long promises to feel secure. In their place comes an appreciation for moments that are brief, but real. A message that arrives late. A phone call with no clear subject. A quiet nod of recognition when nothing more needs to be said. At times, a connection fades naturally. No drama, no explanations required. It pulls back like a light dimming at dawn. A trace of longing may pass through, but it doesn't linger. Because in the stillness that's been learned, Scorpio understands that this space isn't absence. It's room for something more fitting to arrive if it chooses to. And there are connections that once seemed ordinary that suddenly become clearer. An old friend sitting nearby on a late-night ride. A coworker sharing a simple life story during a break. These threads aren't loud, but they're strong enough to lean on. They don't ask to become anything else. They only ask to exist as they are. And through this new way of sensing, Scorpio slowly understands that connection isn't about numbers, and it isn't about how deeply things are displayed. It lives in the feeling of ease when being together. The feeling of not needing armor, not needing explanation. Just two people walking their own paths, sometimes side by side, sometimes crossing briefly. And that is enough. From that sense of fullness, a familiar companion, once overlooked, quietly steps forward. Intuition. Not loud, not asking for attention. It's there like a small flame in the corner of the room, not lighting up everything, but enough to know where you are. Scorpio has always been sensitive to subtle signals, to vibrations that are hard to name. It's just that before, they were often covered over by logic, by the need to explain, to be certain. When there's no longer a need to prove anything to anyone, intuition finally has room. It shows up in very ordinary moments, standing at a crossroads and suddenly feeling one direction way less, hearing an offer and noticing the heart shift its rhythm, sitting in a silence that lasts just long enough to know there's nothing more that needs to be said. These feelings don't come with promises. They don't insist. They simply exist, quietly guiding the way. Some afternoons, Scorpio walks slowly through a familiar street and notices a pause in front of a small cafe never visited before. No clear reason, just a sense that the moment feels right. stepping inside, ordering a cup of coffee, sitting by the window, watching people pass. Nothing significant changes, and yet a very real sense of calm remains, as if the inner rhythm was heard correctly. Intuition isn't always right, and it doesn't need to be. It's not a detailed map, it's a compass. When trusted with ease, choices no longer feel frightening. If a decision doesn't lead where hoped, disappointment comes, and then moves on. Because what matters isn't the outcome, but having listened to yourself in that moment. Sometimes, intuition suggests pausing, not replying to a message right away, not rushing to accept an invitation, by letting time pass just a little longer before moving forward. In a world that constantly pushes for speed, this slowness feels different, like standing under a late-night streetlight, allowing shadow and light to exist together without needing to separate them. Gradually, the relationship with intuition becomes familiar. No suspicion, no idealizing it, just listening and noticing. When what's felt inside aligns with what's happening outside, Scorpio feels steadier, even if the steps remain slow. And when they don't align, there's no panic. Things are gently set down, waiting for another breath. And in that quiet companionship, the journey continues to open. No grand maps, no bright floodlights, just a small flame, warm enough, steady enough, to light each deeply human step. Each step chosen by the most honest feeling available, right here in the present moment. And then, looking back, the journey is no longer measured by big milestones or changes that are easy to name. It shows itself in a slower pace along a familiar road, in lingering a little longer beneath a late-night streetlight, in the calm of being alone inside a quiet room. Not because everything has become clearer, but because clarity is no longer required in the same way. Scorpio keeps moving forward just without the rush. Each step carries a fuller presence, not to arrive somewhere, but to feel the foot meet the ground. Some days, it seems like the journey hasn't moved much at all. Yet, on those very days, something inside quietly rearranges itself. Perhaps what matters isn't knowing where you're going, but recognizing where you are and feeling at ease with that, like just enough light in the dark. Not enough to erase every shadow, but enough to keep from losing the way. Peace doesn't come from answers. It arrives through allowing questions to remain open. Sometimes, sitting in stillness, watching thoughts drift by, a gentle question appears. What rhythm am I truly walking to? There's no need to answer right away, just letting the question stay, like a companion walking alongside you in the days ahead. The journey continues quietly, without spectacle, without display. It carries its pauses, its subtle sensations, its small but honest choices. And as this story rests here for a moment, what lingers isn't an ending, but a soft settling. Enough space for each person to continue their own journey in the way that feels most fitting.